When the original DJI FPV system first came out in 2019, I severely underestimated how popular it was going to be with normal FPV pilots. It was so much more expensive than analog systems, so I assumed that the only people who would be buying the DJI FPV system would be people with a lot of money or content creators who could sort of justify it as a business expense. But it hasn't worked out that way. DJI is more popular than analog in a lot of circles. In fact, some estimates that I've heard are that more than half of all FPV pilots, certainly in the USA, own at least one DJI quadcopter, and many of them fly DJI exclusively. And that gives us a really good context for understanding the product that we're looking at today. This is the DJI O3 Air Unit, the next generation of DJI's FPV video transmitters. And it brings a higher level of performance, an increased feature set. Basically, it's the next generational step for the DJI FPV system. Oh yeah, and it's also even more expensive. And my gut feeling is to say, that means I don't know how many people are really going to be willing to pay this much for it. But I was wrong about that the last time, so maybe I ought to hold my horses. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. These products are confusingly named, so I want to start the video by just clarifying the product naming and the conventions I'm going to use. Otherwise, you won't be able to keep straight exactly what the frick I'm talking about when I'm talking about them. This is the FPV Goggles V2, and this is a Caddx Vista video transmitter. If you've got a RunCam Link video transmitter, that's exactly the same thing. And if you have an Air Unit video transmitter, that the bigger version of this, I don't have one to show you. All mine are Vistas, the small one. If you have any of those video transmitters that existed from DJI in the FPV system until today, then that is what we could call the V2 FPV system. This is the Goggles 2. Not the V2 goggles, the Goggles 2, because that's not confusing. And this is what we're calling the O3 Air Unit. It stands for OcuSync 3. That's the protocol that this Air Unit is using. Interestingly, this one uses OcuSync 2, but nobody calls it the O2 Air Unit. They just call it the Caddx Vista. Now let's talk about hardware compatibility. If you've got the Goggles 2, then obviously you can bind them to the O3 Air Unit. That makes sense. But the O3 Air Unit can also bind to the DJI V2 goggles. So if you're a current user of Caddx Vista, RunCam Link, DJI Air Unit, you don't need to buy the Goggles 2 just to get into this new system. However, you won't get the full performance of the system. What if you got a Caddx Vista, RunCam Link, DJI Air Unit, or any of the older V2 video transmitters? They cannot currently be bound to the Goggles 2. But DJI is working on this feature and says they'll be releasing it soon. My policy with promised features from DJI is always wait until they release it and then see how you feel about it. I think they're going to release it. I've seen some leaked screenshots, so I know they're working on it, but I just don't think we should count those chickens until they're hatched. That's my opinion on that. So you might think that the smart move today would be to use the V2 goggles, which you might already own. Buy the O3 Air Units if you're interested in them. Keep using your V2 video transmitters and save yourself upgrading to a whole new expensive set of goggles. But let's talk about those performance differences between them. When the O3 Air Unit is used with the new Goggles 2, it can do 1080p at 100 frames per second with a claimed 30 millisecond latency, or 1080p at 60 frames per second with a claimed 40 millisecond latency. We will be validating those latency claims a little later in the video. When the same Air Unit is used with the V2 goggles, it is only capable of 810p, but it can do 120 frames per second with a lower latency of about 20 milliseconds, or 810p at 60 frames per second with a claimed latency of about 30 milliseconds. So if you use it with the V2 goggles, you'll get a higher frame rate, slightly, but a lower resolution, not slightly. And that difference in resolution, that's about twice as many pixels between 810p and 1080p. How much difference does that really make? Let's put these two videos side by side. One of them was recorded with the V2 goggles, one of them was recorded with the Goggles 2, and I did my best to not move the quadcopter at all between the two shots. So we should be able to really zoom in here and see how much of a difference those extra pixels actually make. Which one's better? Like, there's marginally more resolution on the 1080p one, but I really have to look for it. To be honest with you, the place where I mostly see the difference, and I've actually spent a fair amount of time looking at these pictures trying to find differences, the place where I mostly see the difference is over here. If I look at one of the goggles, you see just a little bit of stair-stepping here when I zoom in, whereas the 1080p resolution on the new goggles 2 is just a little smoother. Like, now it's like looking super obvious to me how nice and smooth this straight line is. But anytime that there's just like sort of messy detail, it's much harder to pick out which one's the winner. And I think that's going to be even more true when you actually start flying and things are moving and you've got motion compression. Like, for example, here is a test image from a flight with the Goggles 2 and the O3 Air Unit. So this is 1080p. And here is an 810p image from a different flight flown with the V2 goggles. Go back and forth if you need to. I think the differences are pretty subtle. While we're at it, here's an image from the original DJI camera with a Caddx Vista. So this is just 720p resolution. All of them at 50 megabits per second, max bit rate, all of them doing the best they can, and you can compare for yourself. I do think that the new goggles look better, but I'm not actually convinced it's because of their higher resolution. The reason that these goggles look so much better is their screens. These goggles have 1080p OLED screens. I have said in the past, yeah, OLED's better. I've never disputed that OLED is brighter, richer colors, more saturated, darker blacks. No one really disputes that OLED is better than LCD for just image quality. I don't think, does anybody really dispute that? But I've said I don't know if it makes that much of a difference and if you would really want to pay extra for it. But twice now in my life, once with the walk snail system when going from DJI to walk snail after flying a whole day, and once with these goggles, after going back and forth repeatedly between the V2 goggles and the goggles 2, I have thought, wow, this looks so much better. Why does it look so much better? And it feels like there's more resolution and it feels like there's more detail. And then you look at the DVR and you can see that there's not that much more detail there. So why does it feel so much better? And I think it's the screens. I think the screens are just blasting your eyeballs with beautiful, beautiful color and information. More contrast. Maybe you just see more details with a more contrasty screen. Oh, that's actually plausible. I do think that the OLEDs look a lot better and are a significant upgrade compared to the LCD. It's hard to convey with video just how much freaking smaller and lighter the Goggles 2 are compared to the V2 goggles. I'd seen pictures of them before, even on people's faces. They're so much smaller and lighter, like they feel like FPV goggles, not whatever these are. If you've thought that the DJI goggles are uncomfortable or heavy on your head, these things are a big, big improvement. I will say that I like the aftermarket foam on my V2 goggles more than I like the stock face pad on the Goggles 2. It's not really foam, it's more of a rubbery material. It doesn't have a lot of padding. I didn't find it uncomfortable, but I did find that I had to sort of set the goggles in a certain place on my face so that it rested against stuff. And if it was a wider, thicker, more padded foam, I felt like I would have a little more flexibility in where I put them. There was also a little bit of light leak for me around the nose, which doesn't bother me that much, but I know it drives some people crazy, and thicker aftermarket foam might solve that. Now we're going to power the goggles up, and that brings us to this, the DJI battery pack. This is included with the goggles, so that's nice, but DJI has made some changes to how the goggles are powered that are going to annoy some people. The battery pack has a USB plug for charging. Just plug it in, wait till the lights light up, and it's fully charged, and it comes with a cable that plugs into it and clips on. It's got a retention clip for safety, and that's nice, but keep in mind that this is not a generic USB power bank. It is a 2-cell lithium battery that happens to use a USB plug as its interface. So you can't use this to charge your phone or anything else. To power the battery pack up, you short press, long press. If you're new to DJI, you'll get used to that very quickly. And once the lights are on, it's fully powered. And then we plug it in, and that brings us to the next annoying thing. This is the standard barrel plug that's used on basically all FPV goggles, and this is the plug that DJI uses on the new goggles too. And yeah, they're not the same. So if you already have like an XT60 to barrel plug cable, like I have a jillion of these, you can't use it with the goggles too. Surely people will start making XT60 to barrel plug goggles for the goggles too, and they'll be available soon, but it is super annoying that they changed that plug for who knows what reason. I know the reason. I know why they did it. Ha ha ha. This is the other annoying thing. These goggles are only rated up to 11.1 volts input. So basically not even a fully charged 3-cell battery. Basically they're only usable with 2S. And I'll bet the reason DJI changed that plug was to prevent dumbasses like me from plugging in a 6S battery and then going, oh, why did I destroy my glasses? So, okay, DJI, you got me. I understand why you did it. You're going to have to remember that. And if you do use it with aftermarket batteries, you're going to either need a cable with a voltage regulator in it to take it down to 2-cell, or you're going to need to have 2-cell batteries. Let's plug them in. The boot up time on these things is fast as frick. Look, they're already on. You can't see that they're on because they also have a face sensor, which is super annoying for doing demonstrations like this. That's literally how fast they boot up, though. If you're used to waiting 30, 45 seconds for your V2 goggles to boot up, this is better. Oh, there they are. The V2 goggles can adjust both the inner pupillary distance, that is the lefty-righty, inny-outy spacing of your eyeballs, and they can adjust diopter. They can have focused adjustment from +2 to -8. I have a -675 prescription, and I have to turn it almost all the way to -8 to get it into focus, so I don't know how accurate that is, but it's a pretty extreme range, and a lot of people are going to be able to just turn this knob and adjust the focus to exactly where they want it to be. DJI has also done something really smart. Once you've got it adjusted, you push up on the knob and you turn and screw it in, and it locks the knob in place. If you have a prescription that's outside that range, or like me, you have some astigmatism, then they also make these. These are just lens holders, and you can get custom lenses cut, which will then just fit on here over there. And that's pretty freaking cool too. I will say I have an astigmatism of, I think it's around 1.25. And I was able to get a perfectly usable image just by using the focus adjustments. I think if your astigmatism isn't too bad, you could probably get away without the custom lenses. The goggles too have built-in antennas, and they're omnidirectional antennas. It might look or feel like there would be a patch antenna somewhere or here on the front, but that's not what DJI says in their spec sheet. These two antennas flip down for storage, and that's kind of nice. The other two are completely internal. As far as I can tell, there isn't a way to remove them. Like if you're thinking, well, I'm going to unscrew these antennas and put some aftermarket antennas on to sort of beef up my range like you did with the V2 goggles, I don't see how that's possible. Theoretically, you could open the goggles up. I'm pretty sure there's a UFL connector in there that you could put a new antenna on if you wanted to bodge up your goggles and void your warranty, but no SMA or RPSMA connectors for easy use of aftermarket antennas. But how much difference does that actually make? In order to answer that question, we're going to do a test. I'm going to fly down this road. I'm going to fly as close to the road as I can. Get close to the road, Bardwell. Come on. To control my altitude, I'm going to try and fly at a consistent speed, and we're going to look for trouble spots where the bit rate starts to drop. I also want you to know that I am turning my head to face the quad as best I can while I'm flying along this road. And you can see I'm holding at 50 megabits per second for pretty much the entire flight. Right as we get to this part of the road, this is the hardest part where things start to get difficult. Maybe there's a little bit of an obstruction, I don't know, but every time I fly along here, if I don't regain altitude, I start to get some dropout. And we can see a reduction in bitrate down as low as 11 megabits per second was the lowest I saw. Please ignore the RSSI dBm warning in the upper left. It's my flight controller set up wrong. Here's the next place where it starts to get difficult, and again, it's dropping down as low as, sheesh, 3 megabits per second. I'm kind of amazed because on the older DJI systems, 3 megabits per second was barely flyable. There was a big stutter, and there were some stutters through there, but more or less, it kind of hung in there. I never, yep, it's a little stuttery. It's doing its best. Let's see how the other systems do. Now we're going to do the exact same thing with the V2 goggles and the iFlight Crystal antenna. This is a patch antenna, not an Omni, so should it do better? You would think so. But I don't think that's what I see in this result. So here we come up the road, starting to get to the sort of slightly more difficult part, and even now I see the bitrate dropping to the 35s, 37s, way earlier than it started dropping with the V2 goggles. And as we come through this turn, it's dropping 19, 24, 17, 11. We're going to keep going all the way to that sign and see how low it gets. But even though the bitrate doesn't seem that much different, to me, there were more sketchy parts where I was getting a lot of stutters and I felt like I might be about to lose it. We also see the bitrate drop to as low as 1.1 megabit per second, which is lower than the Goggles 2 ever dropped. Now, some of that could certainly be chalked up to the fact that I'm flying the quad. I don't actually just have it like on a cart and I'm moving it through the exact same path. Now, maybe my head isn't aimed in exactly the same direction every time, but I feel like the conclusion of this test is that within a reasonable amount of real-world variation, the onboard Omni goggles with the Goggles 2 seem to be doing about as well, maybe even a little bit better than aftermarket antennas like the iFlight Crystal. This is just one test, and I'm sure more tests will be done. Well, as long as we're here, let's see how the new generation O3 Air Unit stacks up against the previous generation Vista video transmitter. This is the exact same set of V2 goggles and the exact same iFlight Crystal antenna. Let's see how it does. So the bitrate is holding on around 50 megabits per second here as we come into the quote-unquote hard part of the flight. We do see it immediately start dropping, although it's, hey, there we go, down to 17, boom. Just dropped off. You can decide for yourself how you think the image quality stacks up. The bitrate seems to be doing definitively worse. So there's some new technology in that O3 Air Unit that seems to be doing a better job. By the way, we are at 1200 milliwatts here too. Yeah, dropping out, hanging in there, coming around to the end of the run. Oh, can't even read the sign. Get in there. Can you? No. There we go. Okay, now I can read it. The O3 Air Unit is not that much bigger or thicker than a Vista, just a little bit. And I'm willing to bet that most frames that a Vista fits into will also fit the O3 Air Unit. But the confusing part is that they've switched the mounting from 20mm to 25mm, although maybe that's not so confusing. Walksnail did the same thing. I assume it's got something to do with the board layout and they just can't make holes in the board in the other location. More and more frames are going to start coming with 25mm mounting, and so I suppose that's how we're going to be mounting this video transmitter. The screws are M2 in size, and DJI's official position is that you should just remove the screws from the bottom and then get some longer M2 screws and put them in your frame and screw them up through the bottom of the video transmitter. Of course, you could also use a 3D print or tape and zip ties, whatever you prefer. But the camera is the really annoying part. So the camera has the same 19mm width as most common FPV cameras. Here's just a random camera that I grabbed, and you can see that they are the same width. So it'll fit in most common frames. Haha, no. Because on most FPV cameras, the lens is an M12 style that slides easily between the 19mm standoffs and has plenty of room to tilt up or down. But on the O3 camera, the lens is damn near as wide as the body of the freaking camera, and it is just not going to fit between a lot of frames standoffs. I know for a fact that some manufacturers are redesigning their frames. You only need like another 0.5 millimeter or millimeter of spacing to make it work, but you do need to adjust the frame to make it work. And I don't think it's a given that this camera is just going to easily drop into whatever your preferred frame is today. But the reason the camera is so freaking big is that it contains a larger sensor than most FPV cameras. It's a 1/1.7 inch sensor, and that puts it closer to action camera territory than to FPV camera territory. That means you're going to get, well, theoretically, you're going to get better light, low light sensitivity, better image resolution, etc., better. You can decide for yourself when you see more test footage later in the video. The O3 Air Unit has two UFL antenna connectors. Similar to the full-size DJI Air Unit, it's going to use dual antennas to get better performance. But a lot of people are going to be confused by the fact that both of those antenna wires go into what looks like one single antenna. DJI have just combined two antennas into one housing, I guess for ease of mounting. If you did decide you wanted to use this with some aftermarket antennas you already had, you certainly could. Any UFL antenna would work, or you could use UFL to SMA pigtails and use SMA, whatever you'd like. Remember this controller? It came with the DJI FPV drone originally. And everybody asked, hey DJI, could you make it compatible with our Air Units and our Vistas? Because we'd like to use it with our self-builts as well as the DJI FPV drone. Or instead of. And DJI was like, yeah, we'll work on that. Well, what they meant was, we'll work on making it compatible with the O3 Air Unit. Yep, you can bind this controller to the O3 Air Unit, and that's cool. Can you bind it to your old Vistas and stuff? Maybe there's some hope for that, because DJI says that they are also working on backwards compatibility for these goggles, so perhaps backwards compatibility for the controller would be in there too, but we don't know. And that's the kind of thing that I meant when I said, don't hold your breath, don't count your chickens till they're hatched, and wait to see what they actually deliver. But if you have O3 Air Units, you can use this controller with them. Now we come to probably my favorite thing that DJI did, and it's so frustrating because you ask DJI for things and sometimes they don't do them, and then it's super annoying, but then occasionally they give you one that you really wanted and they deliver to the moon, and it's like, I love you but I hate you. The feature that I'm super excited about right now is that the goggles DVR records the entire goggle screen, including any menus, anything, which means I don't have to like try to, here, look, see? I just can talk and record. You can turn it off if you want a clean DVR recording, but for a demonstration like this, so nice. So here's what it's like to actually look inside the goggles. And the first thing you're probably going to notice is Betaflight OSD. The O3 Air Unit supports the full MSP Displayport functionality of Betaflight 4.3 or newer. That's what the paperwork I have says. Does it work with KISS? Does it work with iNav? I don't know. They didn't say it did. Maybe it does, but it works with Betaflight 4.3 or newer at least. That's pretty great. In transmission, we have the choice to broadcast to an audience. We have the ability to turn focus mode on or off, and channel mode is set to auto, but if we change that to manual, we can see our options. And one of the options is frequency, and weirdly, you can't change it to 2.4 gigahertz. We know that the Avata and the DJI FPV drone use both 2.4 and 5.8 gigahertz to get better range. It doesn't seem like the O3 Air Unit does that. And as far as bandwidth goes, we have the choice of 40, 20, or 10 megahertz. And basically this seems to correspond to a bit rate of 14 megabits per second, 28 megabits per second, or 50 megabits per second. Higher bit rates are going to give you better image quality, much better image quality, but are also going to take up more room in the frequency band if you're flying with other pilots. We can see that with 40 megahertz, I only have the choice of one channel. With 20 megahertz, we have the option of 3 channels, and with 10 megahertz, we have the option of 3 channels. Folks, I can't just let this slide, but I also don't have a definitive answer for you. DJI's approach seems to be just set everything to auto and let mommy DJI take care of it. I asked them and they said, yeah, no, you can get multiple pilots in the air. Just keep them separated from each other by a few meters and it'll be fine. But if we don't know the actual frequencies it's transmitting on, then we can't interoperate with stuff like analog or HD0 or walk snail. We can't do channel management so we can play nice with our friends. And it's possible that DJI's auto algorithm takes those things into account, but we just don't know at this point. If you are very, very concerned about interoperability between different systems, and if you are concerned about controlling your output power so you don't interfere, oh, by the way, you can't set the output power on this. It's just auto. You can't turn it up, you can't turn it down. It just is what it is. So if those are things that you are very concerned about, then you should probably hold off on this product until people like, well, probably people like Madstech is going to get out a spectrum analyzer and figure it out. And then we'll do more experimentation and we'll figure out how this stuff all works together, and hopefully we'll get some answers. For now, we do not have those answers, and I'm not going to put this video out without acknowledging that that is a serious issue that all FPV pilots should be concerned about, if you ever fly with other people anyway. Until now, all of the footage you've been seeing has been from the goggle DVR to try to show you what the pilot would see. But the O3 Air Unit also has onboard recording, and one of the things DJI wants you to think about doing is replacing your action camera with this O3 Air Unit and then just not running an action camera. So as you're looking at this footage, don't just think, is this good DVR? Think, would this be better than a GoPro for me? Or would it be good enough to replace a GoPro and save me all that weight and all that money when I crash and break my GoPro? You may have noticed that I'm not playing any sound right now. The camera doesn't record sound. It doesn't have a microphone at all. And that's going to be a deal breaker for some people. Another thing that may make some people stick to a dedicated action camera is the dynamic range of the O3 camera. This is better, in my opinion, than the Action 2, which I really don't like its exposure algorithm and dynamic range. But I still see a lot of times when I think that shadows are very dark and lacking detail. If you prefer a more contrasty color grade, then this may be for you. And I think comparing it to many DVR that you would just get on other units, it's way, way better. But comparing to a full-fledged action camera, there will be some people who won't think it measures up. But there will be a lot of people who think it does measure up. And there are some ways you can make it even better. The Air Unit can also record in a flat color profile, and that's what we're looking at right now. And if you're thinking this doesn't look very good, that's right. It doesn't look good. It's not intended for you to look at it. It's intended for you to pull it into your video editing program and color grade it. Now, I'm not very good at color grading, so I gave it to my editor, who is good at color grading, and this is what he came up with. And I always ask his opinion of any camera I review. It's color science, and he actually was pretty impressed with this. It's not at the level of something like a GoPro, so for like real professionals who need the absolute best possible results, they may not think this measures up, but I think for a lot of people, this is going to be more than sufficient. Frankly, I would like to try flying in the flat color profile. This changes what you see in the goggles as well. And I think it may actually give a little more shadow detail than the standard color profile, which is something I've always sort of struggled with DJI action cameras. Now, the Air Unit couldn't hope to replace your action camera if it didn't have stabilization, and it does. There's only one level of stabilization. It's either on or off, and I'm going to show you an example of it now. I'm just going to start this example by violently bouncing off the ground a couple times, and then we'll do some flippy flops, and you can compare the unstabilized in-goggle view to the stabilized onboard recording, and you can see how much stabilization there is. There's only one level of stabilization here, and there are no additional features like horizon lock. So the built-in stabilization is either going to be what you want or it's not. But the good news is that you can drop these files right into GyroFlow, and then you can do whatever the frick you want with them and tweak them to your heart's desire. I also want to let you know that there are some issues that people have had with the stabilization algorithm, and it's caused by the gyro that's used for stabilization being mounted in the Air Unit in the back of the quad, whereas the camera that's experiencing the vibration is mounted in the front of the quad. And these issues don't come up in every build, but when they do come up, they make the stabilization kind of freak out and not work right. DJI has some suggestions for how to deal with it, including changing PWM frequency and so forth. I didn't run into it in any of my tests, but I do want to acknowledge that it is a known potential issue. Whenever I do a review, my goal is to help you decide if you want to buy the product that I'm reviewing. And I think in this case, we've got two products we've got to look at. The first is the O3 Air Unit. Do you want to buy the O3 Air Unit, or do you want to buy Caddx Vista or one of the Gen 2 video transmitters? And the second is the Goggles 2. Do you want to use the Goggles 2, or would you like to use the V2 goggles instead? you might also think, well, shouldn't you be helping me decide if I want the DJI system instead of some other system like HD0, Walksnail, etc. And I'm going to make that video, which video system is right for you, but that's a whole nother video. And so in this one, we're just going to assume that you are committed to DJI and that you're trying to decide which of these specific pieces of hardware is best for you. The O3 Air Unit is a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier, and a fair whack more expensive, $229, than the V2 video transmitters that came before it. But I'm willing to bet that there are going to be plenty of people out there who feel that its feature set, the onboard high quality recording, and so forth are going to make it worthwhile. In fact, the person who I think is going to be most interested in the O3 Air Unit is the kind of person who decides that the onboard video is good enough for what they do and stops carrying a action camera, a GoPro or a DJI Action 2. That's going to save you a ton of weight, first of all. So your quad's going to fly better, and it's probably going to save you money, because I bet that this guy mounted inside a quadcopter frame is going to be more durable than a GoPro mounted outside. It probably depends on how much bando bashing you do. But if you regularly find yourself taking advantage of your GoPro insurance policy or buying new Runcam oranges, you might come out ahead by going with something like this. The range, penetration, and image quality of the O3 is a little bit better than the V2 under some conditions. But bear in mind that you can put aftermarket antennas on the V2 goggles, and you can't do that with the new system. And under the right conditions, you could have high gain antennas that might give you more range and penetration. The other thing to keep in mind is that you can maximize the output power on the V2 system, whereas the O3 has automatic output power, and who knows what that is and how much you're going to get, and if you don't like it, tough cookies. So some people are going to actually get better performance out of the V2 system, although a little less resolution in the image. As far as the goggles go, I think the decision is a little bit tougher, because the DJI V2 goggles have been marked down. You can get them from DJI.com for $429. Some people tell me that that's not in all regions, so not everybody may be able to get that price, but they've been marked down and you can get them a lot cheaper. I actually don't know the retail price of the goggles too as a standalone unit, but I think that we can speculate it's going to come in around $600. The original goggles came in, I think, around $575, and these are more, and it's 2022, so things have been more expensive. I wouldn't be surprised to see a price of $600 or $650. So you're saving a lot of money by going with the V2 goggles. And I think that the difference in performance, even if you decide the O3 Air Unit is for you, the difference in performance of the O3 Air Unit when used with these goggles versus the V2 goggles is not as stark as the difference between the V2 video transmitters and the O3 video transmitter. So I think a lot of people are going to save that money. But if you can spend the money, my goodness, the OLED screens, I'm just completely sold on OLED screens. They are so much brighter, better, nicer, just slap you in the eyeballs with the image in a way that, and this is the first time I've ever been able to go back and forth with a digital system between OLED and LCD and just look at the exact same image being transmitted from the exact same video transmitter and see the difference the screens make. And it's a big difference. And I think if you can swing the extra money for the goggles too, the screens, the lighter size and weight, is going to, and the 1080p resolution with the O3 Air Unit, of course, is super nice. That is going to be worth it for a lot of people. However, they are not currently backwards compatible with the V2 video transmitters, and DJI says they're going to do that, and they probably will. But if that's a key feature for you, you should wait until it's actually done and find out if there are any gotchas that you need to know about. Now that you've decided which of these products you want to get, let me encourage you to head to the video description where there are links to these products, and they are affiliate links. What that means is that if you click the links in the video description, you go to the affiliated store and you make any purchase, you can buy whatever you want, I get a small commission. Videos like this take a ton of work to put in. I love every minute of it. I hope you love every minute of watching it, and clicking those affiliate links is a really easy way that you can support the work that I do here. It doesn't cost you anything, just means that you're telling them Bardwell sent me, and I get a little bit of a cut. I sure do appreciate it. That is going to bring us to the end of this video. I would love to hear your thoughts. I'm never more excited to hear your thoughts about a new product when there's an exciting new product like this. So head on down to the comments section and I will see you there. Happy flying.